welcome to the WiSP Sports Desk. Well, this week we're going to do things a little bit differently. I'm Chris Stafford, and I'm going to be joined in just a moment by Madison Duong, who is a new intern here at WiSP Sports, and she's going to be talking about the youth in Paralympics, which, of course, the Paralympic Games got underway yesterday in Tokyo. So we've got 2 weeks of sport to follow there, and Madison's been taking a look at some of the athletes, just her pick of a few athletes that we need to keep a look out for. And as usual, Nancy Gillen will be here. She did have a personal errand to run, though, so she's a little bit late joining us this week, and she'll have her pick of the top news stories coming up a little bit later on in the show. And also, I've spoken to Emily Adams from USA Today about a brand new report that came out after the Olympic Games on the gender and media coverage of the Olympic Games. And so Emily's going to be talking to me about that a little bit later on in the program. But first of all, we're going to begin with Madison Duong, who is up in Maine, in New England. Madison, welcome to the program.
Mm-hmm. Hi, I'm happy to be here.
Well, first of all, welcome to WiSP Sports officially, because you're now on your second week with us, aren't you?
Yes, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much. It's been a great opportunity.
We are glad to have you, and are doing a great job with our social media already. So if anybody is following us on any social media channels, make sure you check out all the others too. We're on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. They're our main channels, although we're also on YouTube as well. But Madison's been doing some great things with videos on YouTube, on TikTok and Instagram Reels in particular. They're fun to do, aren't they, Madison?
They are fun. Yeah, I grew up doing some film editing, so it's nice to kind of stretch those skills again.
Oh, good for you. All right, so we're starting a new segment whilst you're with us, and that is about youth in sport. We cover absolutely everyone here at WiSP Sports, of course, and the youth segment is particularly important to us, and not least of all now with the Paralympics getting underway this week. So you've, as I said, picked a few athletes that you think we should be keeping an eye out for. So why don't we start with your para-badminton player, Chinese teenager from China. Tell us about her.
Yeah, Liu Yuntong is 17. She's, like you said, a Chinese para-badminton player. And what's exciting is that para-badminton is making its debut during the Tokyo Games. So this will be the first time it's been on a Paralympic stage. So she is a two-time world champion gold medalist in the women's WH2 singles, which is really exciting. So we'll be looking out for her and seeing how she does on the Olympic stage. And the group stage matches will start on Wednesday, September 1st for her. So definitely keep an eye out for her. She's going to be doing some great things for para-badminton.
Yeah, because the Chinese are very good at badminton, as they are in table tennis. There's some sports that they really excel in, and that's one of them, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. When I was back watching the Olympics, it was, I think the gold and silver matches in badminton were between two Chinese players.
Yeah, they certainly have the edge there. All right, we will keep an eye out for her. And your next one is a para swimmer, Madison. Tell us about her.
Yeah, Jiang Yuan is a 16-year-old Chinese para swimmer. She's the current world record holder in the 100-meter freestyle and 50-meter butterfly. She will be competing on Tuesday, so the day that we're recording this, at 9:24 in the 50-meter 6X freestyle.
Okay, so that was one to watch out for, because obviously they will be the heats for her. And now, finally, you've got a para-athlete there, a German para-athlete. What do you know about her? Yeah,
so Meryl Menya is a 17-year-old para-athlete from Germany. She will be participating in several different races, the 100-meter, 400-meter, 800-meter, and 1,500-meter, as well as the 5,000-meter T54 races. She recently competed in the Bydgoszcz, Poland Para Athletic Championships this past June. And she was the only athlete to win 4 medals at that competition. So she's another one to keep an eye on during the games.
Oh my goodness. So she's in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 races.
Yeah, she'll be competing quite a bit.
Yeah, she certainly has. All right, so there's 3 top athletes then that you've picked to look out for at these Paralympic Games, and they got underway yesterday, of course, in Tokyo, and run through the 4th of September. So a lot of sport to cover here, and you're going to come back next week then, Madison, and talk a little bit more about youth in sport, and no doubt from the Paralympics.
Yeah, we'll have some results by then, which will be exciting.
Yeah. Now, are there any particular sports that you follow with added interest, or are you interested in all of them?
I'm definitely interested in all of them, but I did grow up doing some swimming and horseback riding. So the para swimming and the para equestrian will definitely be piquing my interest.
The para dressage, of course, yes, it's extremely popular. It's amazing how the riders in para equestrian, they can have all kinds of disabilities, as they can in the other sports too. But the one fascinating part about para dressage is that they can actually be completely blind and still ride a horse. And they will have the test that they have to perform. They will have that called to them, and someone will be calling the movements to them, and they count the number of strides of the horse's strides to know where the mark starts and ends. And I'll tell you it's fascinating side story to this, Madison. In the 2010 World Equestrian Games, which was held in the Kentucky Horse Park over here in the States, there was a rider coming after the lunch break. And during the lunch break, typically the dressage arena, just like show jumping arenas, they are dragged. They put a tractor in there and they drag the arena to smooth it all out again. So the arena had been dragged during the lunch break, and she was the first athlete to come in, the first rider after the lunch break, and she started her test. And she didn't have it called, but she knew it, and she knew her test. And she got so far across the arena, and she said she stopped. And she told the judges the arena is the wrong size, because she knew from counting her strides, and she's totally blind. She knew from counting her strides that the arena marker was off, and apparently, when they put the arena back after it had been dragged, they didn't put it back to the regulation measurements. So,
oh wow.
Yeah. She, although she couldn't see, she knew it was off, and she had to get it reset before she could resume her test. So, yeah, it's marvelous what they can do. Of course, they really are an inspiration. So we'll have a lot more coverage of the Paralympics over the next couple of weeks here at WiSP Sports. So, Madison, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. That's great to have you here, and of course it's great for us to have a focus on youth sports as well. So I guess you'll be watching them avidly over the next 2 weeks, and come back next week with another update.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Chris.
So you're back, Nancy. You had a little errand to run.
Yeah, I went off to the optician to get some glasses, because bit short-sighted. So when it's now we're going back to sporting events, I need to actually be able to see what's happening. So sorted that problem.
Yeah, see what's happening the other side of the pitch. All right. Well, before we get into your news this week, because we're on a bit of a time crunch here, I do want to bring in our second guest this week, Emily Adams, who I spoke to just yesterday, about a report that she reviewed for USA Today. The report is by the Reps Project. It's #RespectHerGame, and it's about the gender and media coverage of the Tokyo Summer Olympics. So let's hear from Emily. Tell us how it came into your sphere, so to speak, and how you got to write about it for USA Today.
Yeah, so I'm pretty involved in women's sports coverage on, social media and things like that. And I just stumbled across the report as, I was looking through some of the women's sports accounts and things that I, follow and check regularly. And I thought it was a really interesting, look at, what happened in Tokyo and, how there's this kind of distinction between, the quantity of content that women athletes are receiving versus the actual quality of that content.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. Or let's, before we dig deeper into that, let's talk about the REP project, because it was the REP's project's report, Respect Her Game. What is the REP project? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so the REP project is short for the Representation Project, and their mission focuses on combating sexism that through film and television, where, we have a lot of problems in Hollywood with the way that women are portrayed and, in TV and things like that. So they do a lot of research and also activism around things like that. And that included for them this year, looking at the Olympic broadcast, since that all fell into their sphere. And they actually told me when I spoke with them for this story, this was, their first time actually looking into the Olympics. But they've done some other research in sports as well. They looked at sexualization in Super Bowl commercials and things like that. So it's a really interesting organization. And they're hitting on an area that there's not, a ton of, activism in. So it's a really great organization that I definitely recommend people take a look at.
Well, they turned this around pretty quickly, gender and media coverage of the Tokyo Summer Olympics. And it came up with some really interesting findings and, as I said, encouraging, really. There was some downside to this because there's still work to be done when it comes to equality, isn't there, Emily?
Yeah, there sure is. It's definitely interesting to look at because, in some ways, these Olympics were really historic and positive for women. And then in some ways, we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, but we certainly do. Well, let's talk about the positive signs of this, because the major findings was the increase in screen time that women had. I mean, we had we had more than equality, didn't we, in terms of women and men equally represented at these Olympic Games. That was the goal of the IOC. They've managed it before. They managed it again. The numbers are increasing, but they were also received the most screen time, didn't they, in primetime TV?
Yeah. So this, I believe, is the third consecutive games where women have received more than 50% of the primetime coverage. That happened in both the London Games in 2012 and the Rio Games in 2012, specifically on NBC's primetime broadcast. And, it's interesting because this year's was a pretty big jump up. It was, the Rep Project's number is about 59% of NBC's primetime coverage featured women's sports. Or mixed gender sports, I believe they included as well. Mm-hmm. But, women also won, when you look at the US, since NBC is, broadcasting to a US audience, women won 58% of the medals for the US. So, it does seem like it's kind of swung the other direction and now men are being underrepresented, but, in reality, women are being equally represented for, what they're achieving. So that's definitely really, really good to see those numbers, actually being equitable.
And one area where we do need to work on, and that is in the commentators, the actual voices that are reporting from these Olympic Games, because it's still the majority of men. 8 in 10 Olympic commentators were men in Tokyo. And that's important too, isn't it? Because of the language, the narrative that men are using in terms of sexualizing women.
Yeah, absolutely. The Red Project found 82% of the Olympic commentators were men. So that means, even though women are on the screen the majority of time for the broadcast, we're not actually hearing women, get those opportunities to talk about their own sports or to talk about, other women athletes. And, there's a perspective and an awareness, I think, that sometimes with male commentators can be missing if you don't have, a female voice and a female perspective in the room. And, that's something that the Rep Project talked about. If somebody is referring to women athletes as females on the broadcast, or, referring to, women athletes as women athletes rather than just as athletes as they would for men, if it's all men in the room, the likelihood of someone, being sensitive to that is a lot lower. And so, if we can improve the diversity on those camera crews and, behind the camera and in front of the camera, I think that'll make a really big difference in some of the issues that we did see at these Olympics with the quality and the way that women were covered.
And also, the quality and the way they're covered, because the language still needs to be changed, doesn't it? I mean, and that can come down to the exec producer, the director, instructing them, these commentators, to change the narrative, change the adjectives they're using. I mean, because they're still calling women girls and referring to them in a demeaning way.
Yeah, one of the things in the report that they mentioned that I found really concerning, it was they found that women athletes were referred to a couple of times as chicks, which is just very, crude in a way, and just not, appropriate for the magnitude of what these women are doing on our screens. And, they're being referred to by the gender diminutive of girl. Obviously, in some cases, we had some young athletes competing, but, for the vast majority, they're all over 18. They're all adults. They should be referred to as women. And we don't see that for men almost at all. Men were only referred to 4 times in the gender diminutive of boy. So that's a real disparity that we saw in the way that women athletes were talked about versus men athletes. The study did find that the actual adjectives used to describe athletes, describing them as champions or medalists or things like that, were very similar between men and women, which is a good sign. But, there's still that issue of gendered language, especially around women athletes, where, male athletes are referred to as athletes and women athletes are referred to as women athletes or female athletes, which sort of implies that, to be a male athlete is the default, and then women athletes are athletes, but also women. And so that too is something that, we definitely would hope to see change, in the future.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's very disrespectful to women, isn't it, to diminish them in this way, just by the very language that they're using. And importantly, at an Olympic Games, it is a much wider audience.
Yeah. And, for the Olympics, a significant portion of the demographic that watches the Olympics isn't traditional sports fans. It's a lot of, women are in the demographic for the Olympics. A lot of older, like middle-aged group women are some of the most frequent watchers of the games. And, unfortunately, when we have sports networks, broadcasting to them, we're still hearing male voices and, seeing sports framed in much the same way as they're framed, in our day-to-day. We see women's pro leagues like the NWSL and the WNBA and the NWHL, getting significantly less coverage than, the NBA and, the MLS and things like that. And, a lot of that is still being reflected in the Olympics, even though the audience is very different in many ways.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is very commendable that they turned this report around so quickly too, and it's quite conclusive. And I'm curious then. From obviously you've looked at this very deeply. What were the biggest takeaways? What was the conclusion overall from this report, Emily?
Yeah, so they actually came up with some really strong action steps at the end of the report. Some recommendations for, improving these things in the future. We have another Olympics coming up in just a couple of months, the Beijing Winter Olympics, and then obviously just 3 years until the Paris Olympics. So they gave some actual implementable steps for both media and Olympic executives to take. And a lot of those center around commentators and things like camera angles, because the report also mentioned, women were much more likely to be sexualized through camera angles than men were during the Olympics. So, they recommend hiring more women commentators, which can then, help to avoid some of those issues with gendered language and, diminutive language and also with sexualization if more women are behind the camera. And it also, calls on executives and directors and producers to, explicitly talk about these issues with their commentators and their camera people and their teams to, ensure that they're aware of, the ways that using this kind of language and using, sexualizing camera angles can be, damaging and disrespectful to women. So that was a big takeaway, was that there needs to be more awareness and more communication from the top down about, avoiding these types of sexist issues in broadcasting. And then for Olympic executives, the biggest takeaway there was that women were much more likely to be shown in revealing or sexualized uniforms, which, isn't directly NBC's fault. They're not deciding what the athletes are wearing, but inevitably when women athletes are getting more of the coverage, they're also going to be shown more often in sexualized uniforms because, so many women's sports require that. We saw that issue before the games with the Norwegian beach handball team who, was penalized for wearing longer shorts in a match. They were told that they had to wear, the bikini bottoms that are typically worn. Beach volleyball players for women's on the women's side wear bikini bottoms. We see, the German gymnastics team at the Olympics protested the sexualization of female gymnasts through leotards by wearing full-length unitards that went down to their ankles. So, we're seeing pushback from athletes saying that they don't, want to be wearing these, revealing outfits. And, some do, and sometimes it gives you a competitive advantage, but, most of the time athletes don't have the option to choose what they're most comfortable wearing. So the report calls on the IOC and on, national governing bodies to, allow women, men, and gender nonconforming athletes to, choose their uniforms and wear what they feel comfortable and most able to compete in, rather than, forcing them into these sort of antiquated standards of what uniform should be.
Yes, absolutely. Hopefully this will be a turning point, I think, given the publicity that these topics have had. And I'm also hopeful that this report has gone in front of the TV execs and the governing bodies. Do you think that has happened? I mean, your review of that report, of course, went out on USA Today. Do you think this is going to get into the hands of the people that really need to see it?
I hope so. I think, the biggest thing here is that we're seeing steps in the right direction. Women are getting more coverage and, coverage of those uniform protests that I mentioned, were common. And, I think there's a lot more awareness now than there has been maybe ever of, women's sports in general, and also, what women deserve in terms of respect as athletes. And so I hope that, it seems like outlets are trying to take steps in the right direction. And so I hope that they are sort of seeking out ways to be better. And that, because of that, reports like this and, the feedback that they've gotten from this broadcast, we'll see results from that, in 2022 and hopefully in 2024 as well.
Yes, for sure. Well, that is the Reps Project's Respect Her Game, #RespectHerGame report, gender and media coverage of the Tokyo Summer Olympics. Emily Adams for USA Today, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And I do hope your report, the review of the report, gets read far and wide. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the program. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, as I said, Nancy, that was very interesting. I know I sent that to you, so you took a look at that. It'll be interesting to see going forward now that we're changing the balance a little bit on coverage of the women and the participation of women, the coverage of women. Now we have to change the language, and we have to get more female commentators as well at these games. It'll be interesting to see what happens at the Paralympic Games, which is our top story this week because it just got underway yesterday.
Yeah, so we've had the opening ceremony now, which is always really exciting to watch. It is a bit of a shame this year because it is slightly depleted. There's been a fair few countries that have decided not to send athletes for one reason or another, including obviously COVID has been quite a prominent issue. Unfortunately as well, there wasn't any representatives from Afghanistan, so the country was set to have its first ever female Paralympian, but because of the troubles there, she couldn't make it over. So it was slightly, maybe a few less countries than normal, but it was still a really, really good ceremony. And yeah, getting into the medals now. So the first medals being handed out are in fencing, wheelchair fencing and para swimming, and then there's also some track cycling happening as well. So it's all getting into it, and it did give me a bit of a buzz again watching the opening ceremony, because you had the Olympics were so great and then they were over, and then you've got the Paralympics coming again. So it's really nice to get back into that of waking up every day and having like really good sport on the TV.
Yeah, we're getting rather used to it, aren't we? It's really definitely getting spoiled. Now, your next story is again mentioning Afghanistan, which of course is an awful situation that's happening, that's impacting so many athletes, and not least of all stopping the para athletes from attending these Paralympics. But this story is about the footballers.
Yeah, so I think there was when the Taliban kind of completed their takeover, I think there was a lot of concern about just women in general, because obviously their freedoms are restricted a lot under Taliban rule, but then also kind of female athletes and female footballers. There's the former captain, Khalida Popal. She did play in Afghanistan, but she was getting death threats and had to leave to Denmark. So she's been in Denmark for a few years now and has been there for this whole thing. But she was kind of warning about what the Taliban could do, because I think the Afghanistan women's football team, well, kind of through their existence, was quite, anti what the Taliban believe in, but they were also quite vocal about, previously living on, in repressive conditions, and they were trying to break stereotypes, by playing sport and being successful in sport. So I think when the Taliban took over, there was concerns that there was going to be kind of instant revenge almost taken against the players. So Popal was on, kind of trying to get messages to the female footballers in Afghanistan, telling them to delete all the pictures off the internet, take all their social media down, like burn their kits if they could, to kind of hide their identities. But there's been a really great, like a relieving update, and that's more than 75 members of the women's football team. So obviously the players, but then also everyone around the team as well. They've been evacuated to Australia. So that is really positive. And the Global Players Union, FIFPro, they're continuing to work to make sure that if any people haven't managed to get out, they're still trying to evacuate them and just ensure that others are also brought to safety. So yeah, I think obviously it's still such an awful situation for them. Like, they're having to leave their homes, and some of their family have been taken with them, but I imagine not all of their family. So, it's awful that just because they're football players, they're having to leave their country and go to Australia. But I think, that, hopefully they'll still be able to play at least over there, and hopefully soon they might be able to return back to their country. But I think just not even the footballers, every kind of female athlete there, it's a really sad story, because you just don't know whether they'll be able to continue doing essentially what they're good at. And it's not a good situation.
No, it's certainly not. It is not. But of course, most important is that they are safe, and it sounds as if they definitely will be. They're going on their way to Australia, I think I read, and potentially US, Canada, and Belgium as well would be destinations for them.
So kind of all over the world, which does obviously kind of maybe it makes you worried about whether they'll be able to play as a team. Like, obviously that's not their priority, but we'll have to see whether they are still able to kind of compete as a team in competitions.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we're going to go back to a story that we visit from time to time, and that's regarding Caster Semenya, of course, the South African runner. And you've got an update on this. That her lawyers are demanding answers from the IOC now for a misleading study that they put out on differences of sexual development in athletes.
Yeah, so this is really quite interesting, and the timing of it is interesting as well, because as we know, Caster Semenya wasn't able to run at the Olympics because of these differences of sexual development rules. This came from World Athletics themselves. Two World Athletic scientists published a report revealing that the findings of the original study into DSD athletes were not confirmatory. So it didn't there wasn't evidence for a causal relationship between having DSD and being a better athlete. So because of that, the statements made in the paper could have been misleading by implying a causal inference, and suggested that what it should have been. So what it said was, specifically female athletes with high testosterone levels have a significant competitive advantage. What it should have said is this high testosterone levels in female athletes were associated with higher athletic performance. So it's not kind of as definitive. So that's come from World Athletics themselves. So obviously, the people involved in Caster Semenya's case are quite angry about this, because it kind of changes everything that, World Athletics based their regulations off, and subsequently, essentially kind of led to the rules prohibiting Semenya and other athletes as well from competing in the Olympics and over the distances that they wanted to run. So Semenya's lawyer, Gregory Knott, said that it was more than surprising that World Athletics did not reveal this evidence before the recent Tokyo Olympics. And then have also, because Semenya's appealing the World Athletics ruling at the European Court of Human Rights, they're going to try and get this new amendment added to that case to hopefully kind of consolidate Semenya's case. But World Athletics have responded and said that the information in the correction was not new, and that it had been taken into account by the Court of Arbitration for Sport when Semenya first appealed their ruling. So obviously a bit of back and throw there, but I do think the timing is a bit strange, because it is straight after the Olympics, and you would have thought maybe if this had come out kind of two months before the Olympics, maybe Semenya would have been able to compete. But as always with this one, it's a story that never goes away, and you just have to kind of keep watching and keep seeing what happens. And currently we're at the stage where she's appealed at the European Court of Human Rights. So we're just essentially going to have to wait and see what the outcome of that is. Yes,
and it is always a very fluid situation, isn't it? And I misspoke earlier. I said it was the IOC. Of course, it was World Athletics that she was responding to their study. It is very, very fluid, isn't it, Nancy? Things change with gender issues and related to gender. It is so fluid that the science of it is new, but you've also got the governing bodies that are jumping to conclusions too a little bit, based on the science of the moment, which in some ways you can't blame them for doing, but you're impacting athletes' lives by these decisions.
Yeah, and this is what I found this story really interesting, because the correction came from World Athletics themselves. So it was almost kind of like you said, they'd gone with what they thought at the time, but now I don't think they are going to change their rules, but the fact that, World Athletic scientists have been like, hang on a sec, this is maybe not quite what the study really said, just shows how, like you said, how fluid it is, how the situation is constantly changing, and, potentially maybe this rule won't be a thing. And then you probably would feel even more sorry for Semenya that, probably the peak of her career, he was prevented from running. It's just a shame.
Yeah, it really is. But as Nancy says, we'll stay on top of that story and bring you updates as we have them. All right, we're going to stay with athletics now, track and field, because just last weekend there was a meet in Eugene, Oregon, which has had its share of bad weather just lately, that's for sure. But there was Tokyo Olympics replayed, wasn't it, for the athletes over there, the 100 meters particularly. I just thought that was interesting, but what was particularly interesting is who came last.
Yeah, like you said, repeat of the Olympics, but this time we had Sha'Carri Richardson compete, and obviously she wasn't at the Olympics because she was serving a 1 month suspension after testing positive for marijuana, which was pretty big news at the time. She ran in the race and came last. Seemed very defiant. No, she still called it a great return to sport, and that she wasn't done. I think she pointed out that she was still the 6th fastest woman of all time, and that wasn't ever going to get taken away from her. I think that did definitely cause some kind of shockwaves, because she had been kind of talking quite a big talk during the Olympics, kind of from home. So I think people were surprised that she came back and then came last. But I still don't think that means her career is now on a downward trajectory. I imagine she would definitely be back, contending.
It was a big surprise. It really was a surprise for her to come last. It was, there was a big hype around this, and it was her chance to prove that she was still very much in the game, and she will have other opportunities, of course. But I was very surprised to see that.
Yeah, I was as well. I think, she probably is as well, because obviously no disrespect to the rest of the field, but obviously you've got Elaine Thompson and Shelly-Ann Fraser-Price and Sharika Jackson, but she isn't like in that field. You wouldn't have placed her last, if you know what I mean. She was definitely underperforming. So Elaine Thompson-Herah won. Now, she's a double Olympic champion from Tokyo, double Olympic champion from Rio, but she actually managed to run even faster in this race. So she ran 10.54 seconds, so in Tokyo she ran 10.61 seconds. It's the second fastest time in the world. It's only 0.6 seconds. Oh, my maths is not great. It's either 0.6 or 0.06 seconds slower than Florence Griffiths-Joyner's world record, which she set in 1988. And I don't know too much about that world record, but I know it's a bit dubious. I know the wind speed or something like that was quite a big factor in it.
Yes.
So I know that it's obviously a world record, confirmed world record, but I know there might have been some other factors in play. So for Elaine Thompson-Herah to get so close to it, and she's just continuing to get better and better. You would have thought almost the Olympics, every athlete works towards the Olympics, and maybe after they kind of take it slow a bit, but she's just continuing to be incredible.
They can be forgiven for taking a deep breath, right? And just maybe just turn the pace down a little bit, because this is not an Olympic medal, but she's done quite the opposite.
Yeah, she really has. And I think it's weird to say, but I almost think she's not underrated, but I just don't think she gets as much plaudits as she should. She should be, in my opinion, kind of on the same platform as Usain Bolt was when he was doing the same kind of thing. I think she's obviously we'll look back on her as, I think, as one of the best women sprinters ever. I'm lucky. I think we're lucky to be at a time where she's running, and also to have other competitors as well, like Fraser-Price, and it'd be interesting to see what Richardson does.
Yes, it will.
But she obviously will be successful later on in her career.
And if she comes back sort of to be in a medal, position, can you imagine the caliber of that race if she is?
Yeah, exactly. I think that they're almost all pushing each other, aren't they?
Are, yes. There's nothing like competition to up your game. Yeah, for sure. We're going to turn now to one of my favourite sports, full disclosure, and that is cricket. Miss it terribly. And I was not able to watch any of this. We've had Beth Barrett-Wild on, who organised the 100 for England cricket, this series that just played out in the UK. And by all accounts, it was tremendous success, and it got you there watching live in person too, didn't it, for the first game?
Yeah, I was at the opening game. So I was at Oval Invincibles versus, I think, Manchester Thunder, and Oval Invincibles actually went on to win the whole tournament. So obviously I was a lucky charm.
Yeah, you have to go again.
Yeah, so I watched it on TV. I wasn't able at the final. I watched the final on TV. I wasn't able to go, but that's it. Oval Invincibles defeated Southern Brave. They were kind of far superior. They managed to, essentially, you have each team has 100 balls, which is why it's called the 100. One team gets as many runs as they can, and then the other team tries to chase them down. It's it's a really simple format. I can't, the Oval Invincibles had won quite early on into Southern Brave trying to chase them down. They were that good. I think there was. Yeah, was it Marizanne Kaff? I think she claimed she got 3 wickets in the first 10 balls. So at that point, it was kind of obvious that Southern Brave were going to lose. But yeah, it still was a really entertaining match. And I think it was the attendance was such a big thing as well. So it took place at Lord's. It was a double header before the men's game. So all the matches were double headers. And sometimes in some sports, I don't think it works as much, but I think for cricket, it does, because people kind of see it as a big day out. So a lot of people had come to the final, and I think the attendance was it was around 17,000, which is like a record attendance for a domestic cricket match. So, in terms, as you said, we've had Beth Barrett-Wild on the show talking about how she wanted the 100 to increase kind of female participation in cricket, but also kind of get girls and women watching it. And seems like she's succeeded in that, definitely, because 17,000 people watching a women's cricket final was incredible. Yeah,
wonderful. I envy you. I envy all of them. Wonderful success. So congratulations to them, furthering the game there of cricket. We're going to move to tennis now for our penultimate story this week, and we should mention that before you do, Nancy, that congratulations to Ash Bartley, who stayed on number 1 position in the rankings there after winning the Cincinnati Masters. And she did it in style. I watched some of that. It was quite a joy to watch her. She's really on form at the moment.
Yeah, she is having a great year. Having won Wimbledon as well. I think she'd been absent from the tennis circuit for quite a while last year because of coronavirus. So, it should be, I think people had almost forgotten how good she was, but she's come back and, just proved why she's world number 1. So she stayed in the top spot. And then what was interesting was kind of what happened in second and third. So Ania Sabalenka moved up to number 2. So the Belarusian tennis player she is also having an incredible year. It's been a bit of a breakthrough year for her. So she won the Madrid Open in May. And then she hadn't had the best record at Grand Slams, but she managed to reach the semi-finals of Wimbledon. So I'm sure she'll be hoping to go on to the next, the US Open, Australian Open, and try and get to the final. So she's moved up to number 2 at the expense of Naomi Osaka, who I think it's fair to say, been struggling a bit on the court. Though, again, to be fair, her best tournaments are normally the US Open and the Australian Open. So she's won each Grand Slam twice. So I think a fair kind of judgment of her performance at the moment will be at the US Open next week. She's moved down to number 3. And then, just kind of most of the top 10, I think, stayed the same. But just interesting to see Naomi Osaka move down a bit because, she hasn't really been performing. I think as well, she could have, obviously the Olympics was a massive blow to her. I think to go out in the opening rounds of the tournament when she was kind of the home favourite and probably really wanted to get gold at a home Olympic game. So it'd be interesting again to see what happens at the US Open, because like I said, that's where she plays best. So she might be able to move back up into that number 2 spot.
Yes, will be very interesting to watch. It's always a big climax to the end of the summer season, the US Open, which started this week on the 24th, runs through to September 12th here in the US. So we'll have more on that, I'm sure, next week on the show. We're going to finish with a football story. That would make you happy, Nancy. You do like your football, don't you?
I do love my football, yeah. Start of the WSL season here in a couple of weeks, so I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, and I like how we play this, because we get the best of both worlds, don't we, with the US, the NWSL and your WSL over there. So, just as ours are winding... Well, they're far from winding down. We've still got a lot of games to go, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's... keeping an eye on it over there. It's... turning out to be quite an interesting season, isn't it?
Yes, and my local team, the Washington Spirit, had a great game against Orlando Pride at the weekend, beating them 2-1. I thought it was really, really interesting. The games came late and the goals came late, and they did a great job, I thought, the Washington Spirit, at home at the Audi Field here in DC. They also have another home ground, which is in Leesburg, which is even closer to me. So one of these days I'm going to go down and watch them there. I missed them there playing the Portland Thorns not long ago, which is a little bit, kicked myself about a bit, but it actually was when all the Olympians were out of town anyway. So once they're now back, and a lot of them are back, of course, playing with their club teams. So, I hope to get to Seagrave Field at some point and watch the Washington Spirit. Did you see how that played out?
I didn't know. How did that play out?
The Washington Spirit beat the Orlando Pride 2-1.
Oh, sorry, you said sorry. I thought you were talking about the Portland Thorn games. Yeah, no, that's a good result. This story about the rankings as well is also good for the US, because they have remained top of the world rankings, which I don't think is really too surprising. Obviously, their Olympic campaign was probably a little disappointing by their standards, but still got a bronze medal. So, obviously that's still a good achievement. Yeah,
it's a medal. It's a medal.
It's a medal. It is a medal. And it's, the Olympic tournament is tricky. There's a lot of very good teams in there. And Sweden was one of those good teams. They moved up to second in the rankings because of their performance at the Olympics, went all the way to the final, and I thought were quite unlucky to only come away with silver. They lost to Canada on a penalty shootout, and I thought Sweden were the better team in the tournament, so I think they'd be disappointed with that. But I think the world rankings definitely reflect the fact that they are probably one of the most intimidating teams in the world right now. It wasn't great for England, dropped 2 places from 6th to 8th. I do think that's fair, because England, not even, this isn't even considering GB at the Olympics, but just England haven't really, in the matches, the friendly matches they played, they haven't really played that well. Lost quite a few matches. We haven't really got our mojo back at all. And then Spain as well, moved into the top 10. And I think, again, this is really well deserved. They've been great. I think for the Women's Euros next year, they're definitely a dark horse to win overall. And when you consider Barcelona being one of the best teams in the world right now and won the Champions League, the majority of their team are Spanish. So it makes sense that their national team is also going to be really good. And then, finally, Japan and Australia dropping out of the top 10 as well after their relatively disappointing Olympic tournaments as well. So I think both teams are normally considered within the top 10 of women's football teams in the world. So I think they will be disappointed with that and will be looking to move back up the rankings. I think there are quite a lot of 2023 World Cup qualifiers coming up in the next few months. I think that's where our national teams will be playing. So I reckon all of these teams will be going, obviously hoping to qualify for the World Cup. And we will be hoping to get a few wins and move up the world rankings. Yes,
need to turn things around there a little bit. And Canada deservedly moved up, my goodness, after their amazing Olympic Games. I stop, think about that, because it was fantastic for them, wasn't it? I mean, You know, they've always been sort of thereabouts. Well, the bridesmaids maybe, but never the bride, and they truly were. That was just an awesome performance for them to win, and none of us predicted that, did we? We did not predict Canada gold.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I thought Sweden were the better team, and just didn't really expect Canada to get to the final, kind of, let alone get gold. So fair play to them, and
totally.
Just it makes for women's football to be more exciting, doesn't it? When you've got a lot of really good national teams.
Yeah, it absolutely does, and we've got some friendlies to look forward to for the final four games. And we're playing that's the USWNT. We're playing South Korea, and we are playing Paraguay before that. In the Midwest, unfortunately, nothing on the East Coast, so we'll have to watch that on TV, but that's coming up here. 4 games, and that will see Carly Lloyd play out her international career too, with those 4 games. Yeah. I think that's about it this week, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
Obviously, what a show.
Yeah, very jam-packed, and we've got the Paralympics to be watching, and the Women's Football League here starting, and it's all US Open. Got a lot going on in the next few weeks.
We sure do. And we will bring you updates next week, of course, on the show, WiSP Sports. You can listen to that online on the website at wisports.com if you prefer. And there, if you're on the website, you'll also find lots of other shows to listen to. And the show notes and the links to the stories that we cover, that's always on our show notes at wisports.com. And we are at WiSP Sports wherever you follow us on social media. We've got some great stuff now, thanks to Madison, as you heard earlier, our intern, who's producing some great videos for our social media channels. Nancy, can you keep up with social media? I mean, doesn't it overtake you at times?
Yeah, it does. It's hard. It's quite hard because I've got my personal social media and then work social media as well. It is very hard, and also kind of multiple apps. It is hard. I kind of just focus on Twitter. I think they just need to, choose one app, stick with that.
Everybody should just play the same game or one app. That would make life a lot easier. Remind everybody what your new social media handle is too.
So I'm now I've got a professional account on Instagram, which is Nancy_Gillen_sports. And then my Twitter handle is Nancy_Gillen. So normally if you search Nancy Gillen in any social media thing, I will come up because it's quite a rare name.
What's the origins of it?
Irish, really. My family are Irish, so the surname is Irish. The first name is Irish as well. Yeah, it's a name. There's a Irish folk singer called Christy Moore, and he sings a song called Nancy Spain, and that's where my name comes from.
There we go. All right, you heard it here at WiSP Sports Desk. Nancy, I'm glad you got to the optician, got that taken care of, so you can see the other side of the pitch now. So what you actually reported on in the past may have been sort of, through rose-tinted glasses. Now we know you actually can see what you're reporting on, right?
Yeah, I mean, if there's any kind of controversial penalty calls, I should be able to tell by now. Now I've got new glasses.
There you go. And you'll also be able to see the mile markers when you run the London Marathon in just a few weeks. How's it going? How's training going?
Yeah, it's going really well. I was running. What did I run? I ran 28 kilometers on last Friday, and this sounds crazy, but I genuinely could have kept running for hours. It was the first run where I used energy gels, to kind of have every kind of 45 minutes, and I don't know. I mean, I presume it was that, but also just kind of I'm now able to get myself kind of into a mental space where I just kind of don't look at my phone, to see how far I've run, just kind of listen to music and just zone out, and then look at my phone and I've run 15 kilometers and I'm like, oh, that was quite easy. It almost got to the point where I'm finding the longer runs easier than just a 5K, which is crazy. So after that run, I felt very confident about the London Marathon because, like I said, I felt like I could keep going, and that's what I'm going to have to do.
Yes.
So
I think you're doing awesome. Yeah, well done you. And that's just over 17 miles. So I would like to throw in here, because there is an age difference. And I know I was on a bicycle, but I did 18 miles plus on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, that was also incredibly impressive.
Thank you. I don't know about that, but I think when you get to the London Marathon there, you're going to be really rocking it if you make, if things are, really settling into a good rhythm and you can just keep going.
Yeah.
That's a great place to be.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. And hopefully there'll be a good crowd and I can kind of work off that as well. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. You should too. I hope we can watch it over here because I definitely we'll be cheering. You might not be able to hear me, but I will be cheering.
Thanks. I think there's an app where you can track me, so I'll let you know about that.
Yeah, that's what we did with Kirsten Lauritsen. Dr. Kirsten Lauritsen, who does the Try This podcast. She was doing the Ironman, Coeur d'Alene Ironman, and in triathlon you can track the athletes. So that's exactly what I did with her. So that's great if we can do that with you for the London Marathon and for future races in your now new marathon career.
Yeah, I think I'll probably be sticking to half marathons, but I'd like to be doing, go to different countries and do marathons in different countries. I think that'd be really cool, like Berlin Marathon, Paris
Boston.
Marathon. I think that'd
the Boston, so we can really cheer you on.
Yeah, well, yeah, that would be great. That would be great. I've been to Boston and I saw, that would be it. That's a great city, so I'd love to do that.
All right, definitely. Well, I can get, a little group of us along there to cheer you on. So put that on your schedule.
Yeah, I will. I'll look in. I'll start saving for flights.
Okay. Right. Well, terrific. Well, keep the running going and I'll keep the biking going and we'll be back at the same time next week with more from the WiSP Sports Desk. Until then, thank you for listening.